Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Normally I do a monologue to start off the show, but we have two interviews this week. One is with a hair braider who was trying to do business in Fargo, but ended up having to move her business across the river to Minnesota because of North Dakota's regulations. See, if you want to braid hair in the state of North Dakota, you have to get hundreds of hours of training as a cosmetologist, even though, unlike a cosmetologist, you're not really using, chemicals or some of the other things that cosmetologists do to necessitate that level of training. And really, I think that interview feeds into a larger question about occupational licensing. A lot of times, are we doing it because we really want to protect the consumers and we want to, ensure best practices and safety and all of that, and also provide a mechanism through which we can hold bad actors accountable? Or are we just protecting the status quo? Are we just protecting existing businesses, existing professionals from competition? Anyway, we'll hear about that. Also, an interview with State Senator Jessica Unruh. She's a Republican from R-Beulah, and she is the sponsor of legislation regarding pore space. And, well, what is pore space? Well, you'll find out during the interview. It's a little bit of a complicated issue, but some are saying that this is a real threat to property rights in North Dakota. Senator Unruh's bill is. She obviously disagrees. You'll hear both of these interviews coming right up. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. I have two guests with me now, and we're going to be talking about an issue that I think is larger than the specific issue that we're going to talk about, which is occupational licensing, and sometimes the ways in which we try to regulate certain types of businesses or whatever in ways that I don't think are helpful. I don't know that it really helps the public out all that well, but what it does do is it does hamper our ability to, foster entrepreneurship in our communities, to bring, diversify our state's economy, which is something that North Dakota is always struggling with. Anyway, joining me now is Peace Suglo. Peace, how are you?
I'm great. How are you this morning?
I am doing great. Peace had a hair braiding business in the city of Fargo, and we're going to hear about why she had to move that business across the river to Moorhead, Minnesota, in just a little bit. Also joining me is Megan Forbes. She is legislative counsel for the Institute for Justice. Megan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Rob. Thank you for having me.
And that's the Institute of Justice and Peace. I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Or Institute of Justice, sorry. Now, Peace, tell us your story. You started a hair braiding business in Fargo, and you had to move to Moorhead. Why did that happen?
Well, in the state of North Dakota, it is regulated. Hair braiding is regulated. They require that you go to school for about 2 years and get a cosmetology license to do anything hair related. So I was shut down about a year and a half into my business because they said I needed to go to school. So when I closed my business, I actually did sign up to go to one of the cosmetology schools in Fargo. And what I found when I went there was that 3 months into the program, just getting into the curriculum, nothing was highlighted in terms of hair braiding, in terms of our texture products, nothing in relation to hair braiding, really. And so my concern was I was being sent to get this license that was going to cost me about $20,000, and nothing was going to be taught and related to what I wanted to do. So I didn't think that was fair. However, by then it was a little bit too late, so I did close down my business because of those state and board regulations, and then I did move over to Moorhead, and I've been doing it, by appointment from home at the moment. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what happened.
What's it like in your area of business? And yours is hair braiding. I mean, can you explain to us a little bit the actual services that you offer?
Well, hair braiding consists of, 3-strand braids, 2-strand twists. It includes weaving. So really things that really just deal with the natural hair. We're not using chemicals. We're not using anything that requires you to go into the skin. So in terms of sanitation or health hazards, that's extremely, generally not the case with us. So it's just really doing what you love. Something you've been taught for a long, since you were a kid. It's been in our culture for generations. And so many states allow this to happen. So it was really, heartbreaking to have to close down a business because they didn't really understand what it was.
Why is it easier to do this type of business? Why is it easier in Minnesota than North Dakota?
Well, Minnesota also had an issue with this before, and so Megan can go more into that, but they do have a law that allows for braiders to do this without a license.
Megan, let's go into that, Megan. What's the differences between North Dakota and Minnesota when it comes to regulating pieces type of business?
Sure. In Minnesota, there was a lawsuit that the Institute for Justice filed on behalf of hair braiders several years ago, where the Cosmetology Board in Minnesota agreed to not enforce these laws against hair braiders because there was an agreement that the laws were unconstitutional as they were being enforced against hair braiders. So right now in Minnesota, hair braiders are free to work without a license. There is a 30-hour registration for braiders in Minnesota, but it's unenforceable because of the Institute for Justice's lawsuit that we litigated several years ago. Now, in North Dakota, braiders need to get a full cosmetology license, which requires 1,800 hours of cosmetology training and passing exams before braiders can work.
That seems 1,800 hours for Now, I don't want to run down. I'm sure cosmetology, people who are in that business are very skilled, and it takes a long, like any profession, it takes a while to develop those skills. But 1,800 hours feels excessive for someone who's in cosmetology, let alone somebody like Peace just described. It doesn't seem like our even though we're requiring somebody who's doing what she's doing to get a cosmetology license, it doesn't seem like the licensing requirements have much to do with what Peace is doing.
Yes, and that's part of the problem. Braiding is not taught in cosmetology school in North Dakota. It's not taught in most cosmetology schools. Regarding the hour requirement for even cosmetologists in North Dakota, it is higher than the hour requirement for cosmetologists in Minnesota. In Minnesota, the requirement is also high. It's 1,550 hours, but North Dakota's is even higher than that, just for cosmetologists.
And in that 1,800, does that mean you have to work with somebody else before you can go? I mean, how does that work?
Generally what happens is people go to cosmetology school, and then within cosmetology school, they'll work while they're at cosmetology school for the cosmetology school and get some hands-on training as part of their experience where they're actually paying to be in cosmetology school and working doing haircuts and styles on customers who come to the cosmetology school for that type of service.
Do we need to do this? I mean, is this really necessary? I say this, I don't know that much about what cosmetologists do. Never visited one in my life. I just never needed one. But I guess I'm wondering, is this necessary? I mean, this seems like a lot of rigmarole for people. Maybe I have a misconception about what they're doing, but that just seems like a lot for someone who's working with makeup.
Well,
right, go ahead, Peace.
Sorry. Well, as someone who's been, in cosmetology school, I do think that it is very much so needed. Now, do we need 1,800 hours? That could be arguable. However, because, cosmetology requires for you to use a lot of chemicals at times. You are using sharp objects to go into the skin at times. Things like microdermabrasion. You're looking at laser sometimes.
Right.
So it does, require some sort of training. Now, 1,800 hours is arguable especially if you are in the school and you're doing these hands-on services. And, of course, you're in school, you can't be compensated, but the school makes money off of you being in the school and also makes money off of the customers that come in to get these services done. So all those things can be argued. But, yes, it is very much so needed. Just maybe not that, excessive.
So we need, what you're saying is we need some level. It's just maybe the level we have is a little excessive. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now,
and I'd also like to add there are states that are providing hands-on training where people can work with other people through apprenticeships. There are other ways that other states have addressed this issue where they've lessened the barrier for being able to even become a cosmetologist. But when it comes to a practice like braiding, that's so safe, common, and something that's just been passed down for generations, cosmetology training doesn't do anything to protect the public.
Well, I think that's at the heart of this, right? I don't think most people have a problem with licensing requirements that are, let's make sure that the people doing things are professional about it and that they've got some level of training and there's some level maybe of inspection or something to ensure that they're engaging in best practices and they're doing things safely, particularly if it's something that can hurt you or scar you or what have you. I think we can all agree on that. It's just sometimes it can feel like these regulations are less about safety and protecting the consumer and more almost a guild-like mentality to just make it really hard to get in the business to protect people who are already in the business from new competition. Is there an element to that here?
Yes, there is an element. This law makes it harder for braiders to be able to have their own businesses. It makes it hard for braiders to even be able to enter this field legally. North Dakota has a serious problem with occupational licensing. It's the sixth most licensed state in the country. 23% of the state's workforce is licensed in North Dakota. And licensing requirements like these have significant costs for the state in terms of jobs and opportunity.
Now, that's important for North Dakota because we are struggling. I mean, we have a two-pronged problem. One is we have a chronic workforce shortage. Even when ag prices are down, even when energy prices are down, we have thousands of jobs that go unfilled. The other problem is we desperately need to diversify our economy. Agriculture is great. Energy is great. But they're too big a piece of North Dakota's economic pie. And so you hear politicians talk year after year after year about how we need to get different types of businesses in. We need to get different types of industries in and diversify our economy so that we're not so commodity driven, right? We're not so in the thrall of rising and falling crop prices or rising and falling oil prices or what have you. And what you're talking about, North Dakota being the sixth most licensed state, I feel like that's an impediment to those goals. How do you say, hey, entrepreneurs, come here and start new businesses, come here and start new industries, but we're going to make it really hard for you to do that? That these two things are mutually exclusive.
That's exactly right. It creates a serious impediment to being able to have a business. And it's unfortunate that people like Peace are having to move their businesses to other states to be able to continue to have a successful business doing what they love.
Well, yeah, we want peace in North Dakota, right? So that's what we want you here, Peace. We want you to do your business in North Dakota. Tell me about House Bill 1345. How did this get started?
Well, when I ended up having to close my business and actually applying to school and just looking at the whole process, I contacted the Institute for Justice and I told them what was going on. I didn't really know if they could help, but I just wanted to see what my options were. And so that's how Megan got involved. And so it's just been great. They were able to write the bill. We got it to House. And so she's just been really helpful in just creating that bill and just giving me the hope of, okay, someday I can reopen my business in North Dakota.
Now, the bill is House Bill 1345. It was introduced by State Representative Mike Nathy. He's a Republican from Bismarck. Megan, tell me, what does this bill do?
This bill exempts hair braiders from the state's cosmetology licensing requirements. It also exempts threaders from the state's cosmetology laws. Threading is another traditional practice. It's a way of removing hair with just a single piece of cotton thread and nothing else. And it would also free threaders to be able to work in North Dakota.
I see that it passed in the State House unanimously, 92-0, back in February. It was before a committee hearing before the Political Subdivisions Committee in the State Senate, looks like last week. I don't see any committee action on this, but I would think passing the House unanimously, you got to have a pretty good feeling about this bill getting through the Senate.
Yes, we are hopeful that it will pass through the Senate.
I like this, and I'm very glad that we're making progress on this particular front. But Megan, like you said, the occupational licensing issue is a larger one than just this. So it sure seems like we're going to get a victory for peace out of this, and hopefully she can bring her business back to North Dakota and enrich our North Dakota communities with her good work. But how do we tackle this? How do we convince lawmakers that this is a bigger issue that deserves attention beyond the hair braiding and cosmetology area?
Well, it's really about thinking about how do we create opportunity, and that we should have laws that don't prevent people from being able to pursue what they love. You're exactly right in talking about wanting to diversify the economy, and reducing unnecessary occupational licensing is a great way to work to diversify North Dakota's economy and create opportunities that might not exist right now because these laws create such a barrier to being able to earn a living.
Peace, Megan, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And Peace, I'm looking forward to having you back in North Dakota soon.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rob.
Senator Jessica Unruh joins me. She is a state senator, a Republican from Beulah, North Dakota. She's also the sponsor of Senate Bill 2344, which, admittedly, Jessica, it's a little bit of a Byzantine issue. I think for people who aren't used to dealing with mineral rights and some of the ins and outs of like energy development. It's a long bill. It's not a bill you could just look it up and glance at it and understand what we're getting at. It's a little bit complicated, and so I think it's flown under the radar a little bit, but it's sure got some people fired up. Essentially, it's regarding pore space and our ability to maybe re-inject things down, like maybe natural gas instead of flaring it, which is always a hot button issue. I don't think anybody's happy about flaring when it happens. Maybe re-injecting some of that gas back into the ground, saltwater disposal. We do a lot of this with the space in the ground, and your bill deals with that. Tell us specifically, what will this do?
Well, thanks, first of all, for having me on, Rob. I appreciate it. You explained it very well at the beginning when you introduced the concept by saying that it is complicated, and it is. As we led up to the introduction of this bill, we looked at so many different ways to try and go about doing this, talking to groups, trying to make sure that everybody's interests were protected and that we could continue the way that we've done business in the state of North Dakota regarding landowners cooperating with oil and gas producers since the 1970s. There was a Supreme Court case ruling that came into play here in, I believe, 2016, 2017. And what we're trying to do with this language, albeit complicated, is get us back to our normal standard business practices that we had in place prior to 2016 in the state dealing with our energy producers and our landowners. And like you said, it relates to disposal of natural gas, or not disposal of natural gas, but the temporary storage of natural gas. That's something that we're still doing research on to try and figure out if that is an alternative to flaring for us here in the state, taking a look at different CO2 EOR projects or even water flooding. and taking a look at our saltwater disposal facilities and if the way that we've been doing it, if the surface owner who allows for the disposal well on his property is the one who needs to get compensated, if that should remain, or if his neighbor's neighbor gets a say in that as well. This bill attempts to clarify all of those things. And since it is so complicated, as you originally stated, we've had a really hard time trying to get the message out there that this is just trying to get us back to business as usual. Because it can be read in a couple of different ways. That's why the House added some amendments on to provide some clarification for some of those concerns that our landowner groups had. And that's why we're going to go to conference committee next week to see if we can even further address some of those concerns.
And I should have added that, again, this is Senate Bill 2344. It has passed the House and the Senate, but it was modified in the House. So that means that the two chambers have to hammer out their differences. Now, I mean, we have... Joe Heitkamp suggested that you have no soul over this bill. I guess you're some sort of a glinty-eyed, cold-blooded automaton out there trying to steal pore space away from people. Why are people so upset about this?
Well, excuse me. So fighting off a little bit of a cold here in the lots of germs going around the Capitol building. I'm a ranch kid. I grew up with my dad raising 500 head of cattle. My mom works in the local school system. And a lot of the concerns have come from people who my dad was friends with, who one landowner group in particular here in the Capitol, but not all landowner groups. And I think that's an important thing to point out. What we're doing with the bill, what the bill does is make sure that our landowners aren't being pitted against one another. If we don't provide some clarification here, like I said before, an adjacent landowner can try to lay claim for a disposal operation that's happening on his neighbor's property. And the person who has a disposal operation, once that water goes back in or goes into a formation, it becomes a water of the state and displaces other water in that formation. It's a complicated process, and ownership of the water changes throughout the process. And so protecting the right of an individual who's got a contract for a water disposal facility to continue to be able to use that is important. Also important is to make sure that, the Sierra Club doesn't move in here, start buying some land that's adjacent to these and try to stop development, because we need to make sure that as we are benefiting from all of the production here in our state, that we can continue to take care of all of the things that go with that, and that includes saltwater disposal wells.
So what changed? I mean, why is this? Because I think the term you used is let's get back to business as usual. When I'm hearing people argue in favor of this legislation, the argument is essentially we're not really change. We don't really want to change anything with the way we're doing business now. But when you hear the opponents, and I'm thinking of Troy Coons from the North Dakota Landowners Association. I mean, they're saying that this is a taking. Like, the government's coming in and taking something from these landowners. So why was this bill necessary in the first place?
Well, there was a Supreme Court decision. It was what we're calling the Mosser case. And actually, the Mosser family who took that lawsuit forward are in support of the bill with the amendments that the House put on. And I think they went back and forth until the House kind of tweaked it and got it to a place where the Mosser family was comfortable with. And there are other people who are listening to the conversation now, instead of just stating this is a taking and this is unconstitutional, as we've heard from the Northwest Landowner Group with Troy Coons. What I have encouraged them to do is come to the table and work on a solution with all of us, because I think we're close, and we might even be there if we can continue to have all the lawyers take a look at what we've got on the in this bill, and hopefully come up with a solution that works. I would, instead of throwing stones and either name calling or using language that gets people really fired up, and it should. Let's sit down. Let's talk about the issue. Let's look at the complicated language and figure out something that works for our landowners and also allows for our industry to be able to get more oil out of the ground. So we aren't punishing our royalty owners in the process either.
Now, I've spoken to Troy about this. He actually called me this last week, and he was explaining the bill to me and everything. And the way he explained it to me is that essentially pore space is like if I have a jar full of pebbles, in between those pebbles is space. And so if I pour something smaller in, like sand or water or something like that, I would be filling the pore space. And so what he's essentially saying is, listen, this bill will take away the ability of landowners to charge people for using, because right now the surface owners own the pore space. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. That was my understanding from my conversation with him. The surface owners own that pore space. So if somebody wants to use that pore space, the surface owners aren't going to have any right to say no to that. And they don't have, and thus they don't have any right to negotiate the terms under which that pore space will be used. Is that accurate? How do you respond to that? Because that was his argument to me.
Well, yes, that's true. You defined pore space well. It's a small cavity in the ground, like if you filled a jar full of pebbles. It's the space in between there. And use of that pore space is different than damage of the pore space, which is the thing. Of course, you need some kind of damage to have a lawsuit. So use of the pore space is a little bit different. But this bill provides a fix so that when that pore space is being utilized, it clarifies when it needs to be compensated for and when it's being temporarily used.
So, if this bill passes, is anything going to change from the way that's being held, the way that pore space is being accessed, the way that's being negotiated between landowners and the people who might want to use that space? Is anything going to change going forward from the way we're doing business now?
It is my hope, and I think everybody's hope, that we can continue to do business the way we have done before. And I think if we don't clarify this, we are going to end up with a slew of lawsuits that are really going to rip the western part of our state apart. If we don't provide some clarity here, we've got even more confusion than we've got now with the bill in front of us.
Okay. So, and this is why it's so complicated, because we have the status quo, we have the courts which have weighed in and sort of changed the status quo a little bit, and now we have this complicated piece of legislation that's coming along, and I think everybody is... Do you get the feeling that the landowners want something new? Like maybe they didn't like the status quo and they see this as an opportunity to grab something they weren't getting before?
That has definitely been a part of the conversation, and I think people don't feel as strongly about that piece as they do the rest of it. What we need to make sure that we protect, I think the most popular opinion is to protect people who have existing contracts for saltwater disposal wells, so that they can continue to do business as they've been doing it. That's been the focus. We've also got this temporary gas storage language in here too, which has caused a lot of consternation, and maybe that's something that we need to take a closer look at here as we go into conference committee. But we need to keep in mind too that when we do projects for enhanced oil recovery, if we don't provide this clarity here, I think it is very likely that we will see less and less and less of those projects as companies move forward, because there's no certainty, which means we will get less revenue as a state, and our royalty owners won't get what they should be getting from the production on their wells.
Well, we all want...
And we'll also be losing some of our conventional fields, because we've been trying to do everything we can to make sure that we can get everything out of those conventional fields as possible.
Reasonable people do not want the oil development to end. We don't want to diminish that. We want that to keep happening. And I think it's been interesting, because when I hear a lot of the critics, I mean, they're making it sound like this is some big sop to the oil industry. It's big oil out there just trying to steamroll the landowners. But when I listened very carefully to the Petroleum Council, you could tell they want to have a good relationship with the landowners, because you're right. I think you're right, Senator. If we don't clarify this, it's going to inhibit production. But on the other hand, if you try to just steamroll the landowners, they're going to fight back, and that's going to inhibit production too, because one key to success in the North Dakota oil fields is the industry and the landowners working together. Now, there's disputes sometimes, and they go to court, and that's just business, but generally, I mean, most of the oil production in western North Dakota is not happening without the people who own the minerals and the people who own the land being on board with it. So I don't think anybody wants to steamroll landowners here. We want to get back to a mutually beneficial relationship where everybody's rights and interests are respected, and we just get back to business.
I think that's right, Rob. And honestly, this is what I do in my day-to-day job when I'm not in the legislature. And I think that's a really big benefit of our citizen legislature here in North Dakota. I work directly with our landowners at the coal mines to make sure that they have everything that they need. And that interaction with our landowners, whether it's regarding coal production or it's regarding the reclamation on the back end, has allowed for me to have some insight into what the industry is looking at, but then also taking a look at it from the landowner's perspective and how they could potentially be negatively affected. And as I've evaluated that here with this bill, I have honestly come to the conclusion that our landowners would far greater benefit from the passage of this bill than the failure of it. I think the uncertainty that would remain without the passage of this bill is not a risk that our landowners deserve.
Senator, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Rob.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. Before we go, a favor, if you would. If you're listening to this podcast on a platform that allows you to rate or review it, if you would leave a rating, leave a review, just tell us how you honestly feel. I would sure appreciate it. All the ratings help boost this podcast's popularity. So in addition, if you want to help out the show, in addition, of course, to downloading and listening and maybe tweeting about what you're hearing or Facebooking about it, if you would leave a rating or review, boy, that would really help. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday. We should be available on pretty much every podcasting platform out there. If you're having trouble listening to the show in any format, email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. You can send any feedback on the show to that address as well as any questions for our weekly guests, Congressman Kelly Armstrong and Senator Kevin Cramer. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.